Mykola and Marta, a lifelong journey. Mykola grew up in a small riverside town in western Ukraine. His father, a mechanic at the train depot, taught him how to repair engines and bicycles. His mother, a nurse, showed him how to listen to people with patience and empathy. As a boy, he spent hours tinkering with old radios, building birdhouses, and sketching bridges in his notebooks. Even then, he dreamed of designing homes and public spaces that would make ordinary people's lives better. Marta was from a nearby village, the eldest of three sisters. Her parents owned a small bakery, so from an early age she learned how to work with her hands, serve people, and wake up before dawn. She loved reading to the younger children in the shop, inventing stories and painting scenes from her village. By the time she finished pedagogical college, she already had a reputation for being the teacher who could turn any lesson into an adventure. They met by pure chance at the annual autumn fair in the town square. Mykola had come to buy honey and some timber for his summer cottage. Marta, together with her pupils, was selling handmade crafts to raise money for a new school library. When Mykola stopped at her stand, fascinated by a carved wooden boat, she started explaining how the children had made it. They laughed at each other's enthusiasm and discovered almost instantly that they shared a love for mountains, rivers, and quiet places. When the fair ended, Mykola offered to help carry heavy boxes back to Marta's car. On the walk, they spoke about family, childhood dreams, and their work. Marta noticed how attentively he listened. Mykola noticed how her eyes lit up when she spoke about her students. After that day, Mykola invited Marta for coffee at a small cafe overlooking the river. Their first meeting was shy but warm. Soon they began seeing each other regularly, evening walks along the embankment, volunteering at community events, visiting museums, attending folk concerts. Mykola built a small greenhouse for Marta's pupils. Marta baked bread for Mykola's parents. They spent their first holiday together hiking in the Carpathians. They cooked simple meals on a camp stove, collected herbs for tea, and told each other secrets under the stars. One night by the fire, Mykola admitted he felt his life changing because of her. She didn't answer right away, but left a note in his backpack the next morning. "You're changing mine too." A year later, Mykola planned a surprise proposal. He asked Marta's students to draw pictures of Miss Marta and Mr. Mykola. At the next autumn fair, the same place where they had met, he set up a small stand decorated with the children's drawings. In the center was one picture of him kneeling with a ring. When Marta arrived, he knelt exactly as in the drawing and asked, "Will you marry me?" She burst into tears of joy and whispered, "Yes." Their wedding was modest, but full of love. They moved into a small house by the river that Mykola had been renovating for months. Together, they planted fruit trees, painted the walls bright colors, and turned one room into a mini library for local children. Life wasn't always easy. The factory where Mykola worked went through layoffs. Marta sometimes had to take on extra classes, but they treated difficulties as shared projects. They learned to budget carefully, to support each other's dreams, and to celebrate small victories, finishing a new bookshelf, saving enough for a short trip to the sea. A few years later, they welcomed their first child, a boy named Taras, followed by a girl named Oksana. Parenthood added new challenges, but also deepened their bond. Mykola built a playground behind the house. Marta organized weekend art classes there. Their garden became a meeting place for neighbors, full of children's laughter and the smell of fresh bread from Marta's oven. They also became more involved in the community. Mykola volunteered to design a small footbridge across the river so children could reach school safely. Marta started a free after-school program for struggling students. Together, they launched a summer camp where teenagers learned crafts, nature skills, and teamwork. Over time, Mykola moved from the factory to his own small design workshop, creating affordable, energy-efficient homes for local families. Marta wrote a children's book based on the stories she used to tell her pupils. They saved for years to travel abroad, finally spending 2 weeks exploring old towns along the Danube, their first trip outside Ukraine. Even after decades together, they still made time for each other. Evening tea on the porch, long walks by the river, handwritten notes slipped into lunchboxes. When problems arose, they sat at the kitchen table until they found a way through. As Taras and Oksana grew older and left for university, the once busy house by the river became quieter. At first, Mykola and Marta felt the emptiness keenly, but slowly they discovered a new rhythm, one filled with travel, community projects, and mentorship. Mykola finally had time to finish his dream project, a small eco-center on the edge of town where people could learn about sustainable building, gardening, and renewable energy. Marta expanded her library room into a full community learning center with writing workshops, evening language clubs, and storytelling nights. They also rediscovered their love of travel. In spring, they visited friends in the Carpathians. In autumn, they went to the sea. They no longer rushed from one place to another, but stayed long enough to get to know the people. Everywhere they went, they collected ideas, new teaching methods, new building techniques, new recipes, and brought them home to share. Even in their late 60s, they were rarely still. On Saturdays, Mykola and a group of volunteers repaired playgrounds and benches around town. On Sundays, Marta hosted free art classes for children from low-income families. Their house by the river became not just a home, but a hub of kindness and creativity. When Taras and Oksana started families of their own, Mykola and Marta became loving grandparents. They told bedtime stories by the fireplace, built tree houses in the garden, and showed the grandchildren how to plant trees whose shade they might never sit under. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the town held a small celebration in their honor. Children who had once been Marta's pupils returned as adults to thank her. Families who lived in houses designed by Mykola brought photos of their homes. Standing together under the bridge Mykola had built years before, they realized how far their journey had taken them. That evening, sitting on their porch, Marta looked at Mykola and said softly, "It all began with that little wooden boat." Mykola smiled, taking her hand. "And it's still sailing," he replied. As the years passed, Mykola and Marta slowed down physically, but never stopped dreaming. In their 70s, they no longer climbed mountains, but they still walked to the river every morning, hand in hand, to watch the sunrise. They began to mentor younger couples in the town, engineers starting their first projects, teachers opening their first classrooms, young families building their first homes. People came to them not just for advice, but for encouragement. Mykola's favorite saying became, "If you want to build something that lasts, build it with someone you trust." Marta always added, "And teach someone younger to do the same." When they reached their 80s, the town council asked permission to name the new community library after them. At the opening ceremony, Marta said, "This library is not ours. It belongs to everyone who ever learned, dreamed, or helped someone here." Even after they passed away, within a year of each other, peacefully at home, their influence continued. The eco-center Mykola had built was still training young builders. The learning center Marta had founded was full of children's laughter. Every autumn fair featured a small stand selling crafts to fund scholarships for local students, and above it hung a wooden carving of a little boat, the symbol of their first meeting. Decades later, the town had grown into a small city, but the river still bent in the same wide curve. The orchard by the boathouse had become a public park. Children ran among the trees, climbing wooden structures built in the shape of bridges and boats. On weekends, young architects sketched by the water, and teachers held open-air classes under the blossoming branches. Inside the boathouse, a small museum told their story with photos, letters, and the original little wooden boat. But it was more than a museum. It was a living space where people worked, cooked, and learned together. Everyone left something behind: a drawing, a seed, a small wooden carving, and took something with them, even if only an idea. The autumn fair was now a week-long festival. The highlight was the evening of boats. Hundreds of handmade boats, each painted with messages of hope, floated down the river at sunset. Some bore the names of new projects, some the names of loved ones, some simply a word like kindness or courage. Watching them drift together felt like watching a story continue to write itself. Visitors who didn't know the full story would ask, "Who were Mykola and Marta?" And locals would smile and answer, "Two ordinary people who made extraordinary ripples." On certain evenings, when the dusk was very still and the water perfectly smooth, a child would whisper, "Do you think Mykola and Marta can see the boats?" And an adult would answer, Maybe they can. Or maybe it's enough that we're sailing them now.